PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.
Hello and welcome to Pharma Television News Review here at the International Biofest in Melbourne in Australia 2016. On this show I have Megan Baldwin, who is the CEO and Managing Director of a company called Opthea, which is based here in Melbourne. Welcome.
Thank you, Fintan. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. Now, Opthea is a company that's focused on ophthalmic therapies.
That's correct.
And in particular, you have a product that is for wet AMD. So first, before we get to your particular product, could you just tell us a little bit about the background to the company?
Sure. Well, Opthea Limited is a publicly listed company. As you said, we're based here in Melbourne. We have a relatively long history, but about 2 years ago, we really restructured the company to become focused on our therapies for eye disease. And we've been focused on that program, moving it through preclinical development and now into clinical studies. We're doing our clinical study right now in the United States, and we've just recently reported data on the first 20 patients from that study. So it's a really exciting novel therapy being developed here, but also being clinically tested in the US.
So just tell us a little bit more about the product itself. So,
Sure.
you know, what's the mechanism of action and so forth?
Yeah, so the product itself is it's a protein, so it's a large molecule, and it's injectable into the eye. So patients who suffer from wet AMD, which is the leading cause of blindness in people aged over 50, are really our target patient population. So our drug is injected into the eye, which is the site of the disease, in patients that suffer from wet AMD, and together with our drug, they also receive the standard of care therapy. And what we're looking to do by combining our drug with the existing therapies is to improve vision in patients and reduce the amount of fluid that accumulates in those patients. What our drug's actually doing in the eye is to mop up some of the signals that are involved in making vessels grow at the back of the eye and making them leak fluid. So we mop up vascular endothelial growth factors, namely VEGF-C and VEGF-D, and these are two important signals involved in those processes causing vessels to grow, causing vessels to leak. And if you can mop them up and you can normalise that disease process, you can potentially improve vision in patients, and that's really what we're aiming to do.
Right. So it's done in combination with Lucentis, is that right?
Our clinical studies are in combination with Lucentis.
Right.
There is another drug that is used often in wet AMD patients called Eylea, and to another extent Avastin, which is another therapeutic also used for wet AMD treatment. Now, we're doing our trials with Lucentis, but longer term we see our drug being able to be added on to any of those existing therapies.
Right. So you did the phase 1 clinical trials you did was with Lucentis.
Yes.
So what were the results of that?
Yeah, so we've just announced back at the end of July this year the outcomes from the first 20 patients of our phase 1 clinical study. And what that study showed is that when we inject the drug into the eye of humans, that the drug is very safe, it's very well tolerated. So firstly, we met the primary objective of the study, and that's a real key hurdle for new investigational agents. But very interestingly, the outcome from that study also showed that when we add our drug to Lucentis, that we saw improvements in vision in patients that were over and above what we would expect with Lucentis on its own. And so that's suggestive that we're having an additive benefit to improve outcomes for patients, which is very, very exciting indeed. And in addition to that, we also showed in patients that had been receiving long-term therapies, but yet had really hit a ceiling of response. They really weren't improving anymore. That if we took those patients and then added our drug onto their existing therapy, that we were able to improve some of the vision as well as reduce fluid at the back of the eye. So that's exciting because these patients are generally under-responding to the existing therapies, and by adding on, we're showing that we may have clinical benefit.
Right, okay. So that obviously gave you encouragement to go into phase 2A anyway. So you've
Absolutely,
got some idea of some de-risking going on. Obviously, if we're going into phase
I think the outcomes of that phase 1 study were as great and as good as we could have expected, really. We showed consistent evidence of biological activity across different patients, across patients that were sub-responsive, across patients that were newly diagnosed. And so we got a great level of comfort in the activity of our molecule. And to your point, I think that does de-risk our asset, certainly from a safety perspective, but gives us a good indication that we're having an effect. And that's really a great outcome for an early stage clinical study.
Right. And of course, the current treatments are quite expensive anyway, so anything that comes alongside as a combination product has to show some real clinical benefit.
Yes.
If it's going to get reimbursed appropriately.
Absolutely.
So that sort of data is really important from that perspective as well.
Absolutely, and the payers' reimbursement is all going to be critical and dependent on the level of clinical benefit. And in this space, if you can improve vision in patients by just a relatively small number of letters on an eye chart or even a line on an eye chart and improve vision to that extent, that is clinically meaningful. That can be the difference between driving a car and not driving a car, being able to see your family members, being able to read a book. So obviously vision and vision loss has a huge socioeconomic impact, and if we can improve vision by a line on an eye chart or even 3 to 5 letters, that's a really important clinical outcome.
Sure. Now you said you're doing the clinical trials in the US. Any particular reason why you're doing those in the US?
Yes, so there's a lot of obviously patients in the United States. We're also doing our clinical trial under the US regulatory system, so under an IND, which is an FDA-based regulatory trial. We also found that a lot of the US sites were very much set up to do phase 1 studies where we could recruit patients and we could move very quickly into obtaining clinical data. And in biotechnology, we want to do things as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, and that's where the patients were. It enabled us to work with leading investigators that are recognised by investors, that are recognised by pharmaceutical companies in this space, and we supplement that with advisors from Australia locally as well. So we've recruited patients from the US, but we're networked with Australian clinical sites as well. We recognise this is a global opportunity, and that's how we view our development plan, as globally relevant.
And of course the US is a important market.
It's a huge market. If that's where you want to be, if that's where you want to end up as a really commercially successful drug, then you should be thinking about those development plans being relevant to those markets.
Yeah, and FDA approved, of course. Ultimately.
Absolutely.
So where does that leave us? You said that you hoped for the phase 2A results to come in next year. Is that next quarter,
Yes.
2017?
Yes.
Excellent.
So we're recruiting patients right now in the phase 2A component of our trial, so that's an additional 30 patients, and that will add on to the 20 patients of data that we've already reported, and we expect to report that total 50 patient data by the end of the first quarter 2017, so by the end of March. We're hoping it might be slightly earlier than that, but it will just depend on a number of parameters.
Right. And presumably you've now adopted a specific dosing regime and so forth from phase 1?
Yes, we're at the top dose that we tested in phase 1, so we're at a 2 milligram dose. This is exactly the same dose as one of the other blockbuster agents in the space is dosed at, so it's nothing unusual. We didn't see any evidence of safety issues with the top dose, so we're moving forward with that. And it's 30 patients, like I said, and we're looking for in a larger number of patients to show across more patients that we're showing improvements in vision, that we're reducing fluid, that's all clinically meaningful outcomes.
And so obviously once you get to phase 2A, you're going to continue to take it forward yourselves? You're looking for partnering? What's the strategy? Yeah,
so we have a very good investor shareholder base at Opthea that we're very well supported by institutional investors that understand healthcare and they understand pharmaceuticals. So we're in a good position to take this forward through phase 2 and 2B clinical development to establish proof of concept in a larger randomised controlled study that's potentially statistically powered. But that said, we're also talking to other interested parties that have other drugs in their pipeline or that might see our asset as particularly interesting, so we keep that dialogue open. And so we're exploring, obviously licensing, partnering opportunities, but we also have a very good cash balance to be able to move forward independently of that anyway. So, a lot of options are available to Opthea at this moment.
But I suppose the key thing here is, what other drug, what drug is going to be Lucentis, is it going to be Avastin, what is going to be your partner in terms of combination, ultimately? Or do you see this being a clinician's choice?
I see it as a clinician's choice. So we feel with our mechanism of action of our drug that we're agnostic. We don't particularly care what we're combined with in terms of the VEGF-A targeting agent. Our science would support us being combined with a Lucentis or an Eylea or an Avastin, or for that matter, potentially complementary to other novel therapies coming through development. So that offers us a range of or offers the clinician a range of options to be able to add our drug to any existing or novel therapy that's coming through.
Yeah. Well, obviously that's to your advantage as
Absolutely. Being complementary across different technologies is absolutely an advantage.
It opens the market for you, broadens the market.
Exactly.
Opportunity.
Yes.
So is that all in the pipeline? Do you have anything else coming through the pipeline currently at Opthea?
So we have a very broad intellectual property platform, and there's certainly other options in terms of other disease areas we might want to get into. But as a company that's focused on eye disease, we see the opportunity for OPT302 to not only be focused on therapeutic development for wet AMD, but potentially other eye diseases as well. And there's some interesting opportunities in diabetic disease, diabetic macular edema, diabetic retinopathy, retinal vein occlusion. These are all options for us to expand our program into other very large markets as well. And that's really exciting to think, where do we go from here? How broad can we go? And how can we potentially improve outcomes for more patients?
Right, indeed. Well, Megan, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
Thanks, Fintan. Thank you.
PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.